All right, I think we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the December 23rd V3 implementation call. It's our last V3 call of 2020. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us this morning. The agenda should be up on your screen. Just as a reminder, we do record these calls and we post them on our website and also on our YouTube channel so that if you miss a call, you're able to watch those and also to refer back if there's a section that had a lot of discussion that you want to go back and look at or share with other members of your team that weren't able to be on the call. We make those available to you. We'll go ahead and get started this morning with Laurel. She's going to give us a maintenance update.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just keep this real quick. I just wanted to remind everyone that our maintenance windows are moving as of 2021. Our maintenance window in January is going to be on the 3rd, Tuesday and Wednesday. That is January 19th and 20th. And they will continue being on the 3rd, Tuesday and Wednesday. For the foreseeable future, we are moving these days so that they do not conflict with implementation calls, so that we can provide better service to all of our amazing stakeholders. Does anyone have any questions about the maintenance windows moving? Awesome. Well, if you have a question later, feel free to email me at any time. Happy to help. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Laurel. Next on the agenda is ET3 update. Do we have John and Neil with us today?
Yes, Julianne, this is John. Can you hear me?
I can, you sound great.
Okay, I'm gonna run through some slides, Neil and I, just to kind of give an update. So if you can allow me to do that, bring my slides up, that would be great.
We can do that. Chris can make that magic happen. All right, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, and folks should be able to see my screen.
Yep, that looks good.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and give some updates, and I'm going to share some of this responsibility with Neil, who is our model leadership. So Neil, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you, Dr. Mann and the TAC for giving us a chance to provide this update. I think it's very timely too because we've had some issues on our end, just getting some documents formatted and up. They should be up within the next several days, but it's good to have this chance to be able to put information out to everybody in case there are some delays on the document. So next slide, please, John. All right, so for the next few slides, we're just going to go over some requirements and some kind of updates that have gone through in the last few weeks. So first of all, we're going to be ready to receive PCR data into ET3 systems starting January 1st when the model goes live. And John can kind of talk about some of these other pieces, especially with the vendor side in a few slides toward the end here. We've had 16 vendors successfully complete testing with our onboarding system processes. And as you remember from the 3 rounds of testing, we've progressively added more and gotten you closer to what we'll see in production. For PCR submissions, it'll be in the NHTSA version 3.4 format. I think as of this morning, actually, it's more than 170 participants out of the original 205 who were selected. We're probably closer to about 100, a little over 180 at this point who have formally confirmed their involvement and their participation in ET3. When it comes to data submissions in particular, the first submission, which I'll go over in just a second, will be due on February 28th, 2021. So that's the last day of February. And then subsequent submissions will always be due on the last day of each subsequent month. At the risk of kind of telling us a bad joke about CMS is we're used to claims data. So if you see that this time window is really long, keep in mind we're used to claims data, which can sometimes take months to be adjudicated. Next slide, please. So this is a kind of a rough schematic, or not really rough, this is actually quite polished, John made it. This is just giving you an outline of what we see how this process goes through in terms of submission outside of CMS, so that's the participants, software vendors, and the assistance of the NHTSA Office of EMS and NMSIS TAC going into our system. So you see we're kind of navigating through a few levels of systems to finally get to the particular piece for ET3 and data submissions there. So just go ahead, there's a lot of details there, but we can make this available. Next slide, please, thank you. To go over just data submissions throughout the life of the ET3 model as we anticipate it, there's really two types of submissions. There's the initial data submissions and then subsequent data submissions. For the initial data submission, what we're looking for are two sets of PCRs. First, those generated from March 2019 to February 2020. The purpose of this 1 year of data is to develop some sort of operational baseline prior to the public health emergency. So just a picture so that it's an even playing field for all the participants. And then as part of that first data submission, all the PCRs that are generated in January of 2021, which is the first month of the model go live. And as you'll see for the deadline, it's always going to be the last day of the subsequent month. So in this case, for the initial data submission, February 28th, 2021. For the subsequent data submissions, it's all the PCRs generated in a given calendar month that are due the last day of the following month. So as an example, all the PCRs created or generated in February will be due on March 31st, 2021. And given how speedy the NMSIS standard submissions can be, there is also nothing that precludes participants and software vendors from sending PCRs as soon as they're generated or curated and ready to go. It's just that we kind of bookmark the deadline as the end or the last day of the following month. So again, while the deadline is the last day of the following month, there is nothing that precludes an earlier submission whenever ready, and you're up and running with accesses. Next slide, please. For resources, we'll have the data submission guide and data submission webinar, as well as user manuals posted on the ET3 site through the Connect site, which we're still working on getting access to all the vendors, but all the participants should have that by now. We anticipate that'll be up before the new year, ideally at the beginning of next week. If there's any general questions for data submission requirements, there's a couple contact points, such as the project officers, the general email inbox. And then for more technical questions, we have a number and a specific email address for that. So I'll just breeze through that since this will be available. And next slide, please. Okay, and with that, I'll turn it over to John to go over some details of the vendor testing that we've conducted. Thanks.
Okay, just real quick, I just want to thank the vendors that participated in the testing. We had a really good 3-cycle of tests that started in October. We had one in November, and then the last one was for 2 weeks in December. So this is kind of the list here of those vendors that engaged in one or more of those cycles. We had a total of 16. And the goal was to prepare them for onboarding. There's a lot of little nuances, if you will, as well as ways in which you go through the system process. And we wanted to give them a sense of that and successfully see them walk through it up to the point of even submitting PCR transactions. So that was a very, very successful 3 rounds of testing that we did. In terms of results, this is just an example here where we were able to not only test the API key request, which is a very important thing because when you actually go ahead and submit PCR transmissions, you need to have that API key attached to every one of those PCR records. So getting the key and getting that approved and that whole process, we were successful at doing that, and we didn't find any defects that were needing to be corrected through that process. On the right side of the slide here, in terms of the submissions for 3rd round of testing, we captured the number there, and then how many were successful. When we say successful, we just mean they were actually sent and they were received, and there was a response code that went back. Now, in terms of that response code, if you look down at the box here on the right-hand side, there is a status code of 200, which is one of the HTTP status codes that would be received. All 41 of those in this example received a 200. And then there are some status codes which look at the payload that's coming in and just, giving some clarification as to what the status of that payload is after it's been parsed and gone through the process of the schematron and all the validation rules. So in breaking down that 41, 28 in this example came back with a code 3, and 13 came back with a -12. So just wanted to give a context a little bit of the things that we were able to look at. We also had a suggestion list that we gathered over the 3 levels of testing. We are working on the majority of them in green here, whereby some are still in development, some are completed, and some are, one of them is completed and the other is still being tested. But the bottom line is that we're going to maintain the suggestion list and get it through to a point where we have satisfied the majority of these or have some level of closure on these. So just wanted to make it known that this is not going to disappear. We're going to continue to work it. In terms of what we learned in tips and techniques, we went through a quick takeaway session. So there's some things that the vendors will need to take away in terms of when they do get into production and they do register, we want them to be successful on their own getting through that process. So we went through a number of these key takeaways and captured those tips and techniques. So again, I just want to thank everybody, and we're here. Neil and I will certainly be involved in January and going forward. So if there's any issues that you have, feel free to reach out to us. And you saw there's a number of resources available, but I do want to thank everyone for their participation. Julianne, back to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Neil. Are there any questions for John or Neil while we have them this morning?
Hey, yeah, this is Emma from Wisconsin. I had a quick question for pilot participants that aren't documenting directly into state sites. In terms of them getting their submission set up with their vendor, is that something that the agency should be initiating with their vendor, or are vendors supposed to be kind of reaching out to those participants? It's just kind of a blind spot on my end, and I want to know kind of where to refer them in terms of the chain. I know a few of our participants, it seems like they haven't had much communication or direction on that front.
Hi, ma'am. This is Lieutenant Milan. I guess I'll jump in on that. We've sort of taken a two-pronged approach. So thankfully, with the venue that the NHTSA TAC has provided, we've been able to reach out to you vendors directly about this as well. I think on the other side, with the communications we've had programmatically with the participants, we've been putting out information that if they haven't already done so, to reach out to the vendors that they normally are supported by and just coordinate there. So we've kind of taken a two-pronged approach. In terms of the broad policy program side, we view the data submissions as really it's a requirement and the responsibility of the participant. While the vendor plays a huge role in it and really enables the transmission of it, the responsibility is ultimately the participant. So in that regard, the real responsibility to make sure this coordination is on the participant who signs on with ET3. We've been very grateful and thankful to have this venue to speak with vendors directly and hope there is coordination. So we're kind of approaching it from both sides, but ultimately the responsibility is on a participant to make sure that coordination is there.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, Neil and John, for presenting this morning and answering questions. We appreciate that. We also appreciate the vendors that have worked with the ET3 to do that testing. That's been really helpful. Next on the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about immunization vaccine documentation with Clay and Josh. I think
thank you, Julianne.
Okay.
Yeah, happy to jump into this. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us for this short time so close to the holiday. I appreciate that very much. Josh, if you want to go ahead and bring up your screen, I know we'll be walking through a number of the elements. I'm just going to add some context here as we continue to kind of maybe fluctuate a little bit in regards to how EMS will participate in regards to vaccines that are associated with COVID-19. We have been directed by NHTSA to certainly provide some national custom elements that would ensure that we could respond to this request, right? But it remains a little bit cloudy yet across the country a little bit and may be different from state to state. What we've attempted to do so far related to this was develop a minimal set of elements that really speaks to documenting a couple of things that will be we're sure need to be documented correctly, and that is to be able to document the vaccines that our EMS providers receive, and also to document vaccines related to COVID-19 that our EMS patients may see. And so what I mean by that is we've not attempted yet to harmonize NHTSA with the IIS, the Immunization Information System, developed by the CDC that's associated with community vaccinations. So far, we're just developing the core set, the minimal set of elements that will be associated with documented vaccine among our providers or among our usual patients, with the idea that if in the spring in 2021, if we need to extend that scope, we can do that. So Josh, do you want to go ahead and walk through just a brief description of each of the elements?
Yes, sorry, I had to find the unmute button there. And I'll just, reinforcing what Clay said, what we've modeled so far is definitely not a full attempt to model all the data that would need to be sent to an immunization registry. This is more to support a local agency's needs to just understand, who they've given vaccines to and so on. And then also take care of medical history or immunization history. So on that note, if you are looking at developing a product that would send messages to an immunization registry about immunizations given by EMS, you'll want to visit the CDC website, go to the IIS webpage, and they have an entire section here with lots of good technical info about how you would implement all those requirements for reporting to an immunization system. Among those resources, you'll find this HL7 implementation guide for immunization messaging. It includes lots of data elements that are certainly outside of the scope of NHTSA. You can see just from the table of contents here, all the stuff that would be collected or reported to an immunization registry. So we're not getting into modeling all of that. So let's show you what we are looking at modeling. First of all, I want to take care of immunization history because it's very simple. Immunization history is just saying, one, in the personnel section of your demographic data, just tracking that a personnel is immunized against fill in the blank. And we want COVID to be one of those blanks we can fill in. So this is a national custom element proposed for DPersonnel 18, which would add one new code to that element to record the fact that an EMS personnel has received a COVID-19 vaccination. This element pairs with a date, so they can indicate when that vaccine, or I think it's a year actually, what year they received that vaccine. The other custom data element for immunization history is in the patient care report, ehistory.10, the patient's type of immunization. Adding the same code there, it's the same data type. So that allows EMS on a call to collect information about whether the patient has previously been immunized for COVID-19. And again, that is paired with a year as well, so they can record what year the patient received that immunization. So immunization history is straightforward. It's those two elements adding that value to the elements. Okay, so let's look at the other topic, which is more messy, which is EMS giving a COVID-19 vaccine to a patient, either as part of a 911 call or a vaccination clinic or whatever. First, a couple elements that are not going to need to be custom elements. I want to show what those would be. Number one is if EMS wants to record the patient number for that patient that was assigned by an immunization information system, then they can go ahead and use the external data group in eOutcome. And so in eOutcome 03, we would recommend that they choose other registry. In eOutcome 04, they would put in the actual IIS patient number. And then in eOutcome.05, that's a text field, and they could provide a value like immunization information system patient ID. So that's how they could record the IIS patient ID just using standard NEMSIS elements. The other piece that we don't need to go custom on is eMedications.03, medication given. In December, there were 2 codes added to the RxNorm data set to cover the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. It's a little odd, just so you know, if you're looking for these codes in RxNorm, you're going to need to grab those actual code numbers and find them. And the reason is that they were added in let's see, sorry, I got to get back to, there we go, RxNorm. They were added in December maybe November. And they have not yet been connected through RxNorm relationships to other codes in RxNorm. So they're sort of like these disconnected, orphaned codes right now. And I assume that they will eventually be added to relationships. So they're hard to find, but they are in RxNorm, labeled as not current at the moment. So we're expecting that that will change soon, and that if other companies get their vaccines approved, that they'll show up here too. So those are the two elements that would not need custom. Go ahead, David.
Josh, is there any chance they're going to be changed to those descriptions look very specific, as opposed to often they're more generic descriptions of.
Yeah, that's a great question. These are probably the, what would show up in the RxNorm graph. These are probably the brand name packs that show up on the right-hand side of the RxNorm graph. So my guess would be that they're going to create concepts and codes for example, for the ingredients and for the specific ingredients and drug pack forms and all of that, and then they're going to tie those all together with relationships. So I don't know if this code would be temporary or if there will just be additional codes added to support all the relationships. Good question.
Gotcha. Are you looking for anything at the NEMSIS TAC level, or is it just, this is just for public service?
So for eMedications.03, these codes could come all the way to the national database, since that's a national element.
Okay.
Of course, immunization, the external data group, those are not national elements, so those would not go. Okay, so in addition to those two, then we've modeled some data elements to collect a little bit of additional information when a vaccine is given. And again, the idea here being just for an agency to be able to track for local purposes. Reminder that custom data elements never get submitted to the national database. So this is just an attempt to help provide some consistency of implementations across the country, not to create a national immunization registry hosted by NEMSIS. So these are the elements we've drafted so far: medication dose number, manufacturer, lot number, expiration date, and then we've added a code for complications in this draft. Dose number is pretty straightforward, 1, 2, 3, 4 for initial and boosters. I'll run through most of these pretty quick. Manufacturer, we are referring to the MVX codes that are on the CDC website and have grabbed the manufacturers that we know are currently working on vaccines or have vaccines in the market. There are a handful of additional manufacturers that are not on the CVX list yet, we assume, or MVX list. We assume they'll be added as their vaccines get close to market. One question we have here is whether we should even make this custom data element, because you saw from the RX norm code that the RX norm code includes information about who the manufacturer was. And so that could be redundant, and we'd love feedback on that. Any initial thoughts on that?
A little bit. This is Dave again. So these elements go with, this is how you document controlled substances as well. If these elements could possibly be used in the future for controlled substances, then this list would quickly become obsolete. And that's one concern about this.
Okay.
It looks like Doug is raising his hand as well. Doug?
Yeah, our approach was a little bit different. Our approach, when we added this field to image trend system, we actually included every manufacturer of drug.
Hey, Doug, can you speak up a little bit? Sorry, Doug, I can barely hear you. Can you speak up a little? Sorry.
Sorry, is that better?
No, not yet.
All right, you can move on to the next person. I will adjust my mic and then I'll come back.
Doug, I can hear you okay.
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 So when we added this element to our system, we actually added every medication manufacturer so we could apply this throughout the system. I would say if you are trying to submit to IIS, this is a required field. So they do not take it out of the medication name. So you actually have to submit the medication and this field. It just depends on how EMS wants to approach. If there's ever a need for us to integrate with IISs in the future, this would be something that you must submit as a required field. So that's, but kind of agreeing with the other approach, we added it generically so that it could be used with, narcotic manufacturers or anything that we want to track in the future.
Okay, yeah, one thing we thought about was, rather than using these MVX codes, which are specific to vaccine manufacturers, do we use something else? And do we just simply use the name of the company, try to standardize that as a text value?
There's a list, and I can email it to you, Josh. I'll ask where development got it. There's a list of every approved manufacturer. I believe it came from the FDA, and they have an FDA code associated with everyone, and that's what we used.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Doug.
That'd be very helpful, yeah.
Okay, great.
One other quick thought is, so medication is an encounter data element versus immunization, which is a patient history element. Was there any thought to tracking doses on the immunizations as a custom element?
On immunization history?
Right.
No, we didn't look into that. We've had immunization history elements in NEMSIS for a long time that only collect the type of immunization associated with a year that it was given.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Yeah, thanks, David. The comment's good, though. Yeah, it's a good comment. Yeah. And thank you, Jim, for your comment as well on chat.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. All right, next, medication lot number. Oops. No, I guess that would be a text or string because it could have stuff other than numbers in it. So that's pretty straightforward. Medication expiration date being a date value. Okay, and then added one custom code to the existing element of medication complication, and that is for syncope or fainting. And I guess one of the questions that be out there is, are there other complications that should be added to the complication list to support complications that may come up during the administration of a vaccine. We're not looking for stuff that's going to show up 3 weeks later, but stuff that could show up right when it's administered. Also, procedure complication. There is a SNOMED procedure for administration of a vaccine. So if people chose that route at the local agency level to indicate that they administered a vaccine, they could, this would be a custom code they could select. These map back to the NEMSIS code that represents other for the complication.
Okay. Just along for those things, there is a SNOMED code for COVID-19 vaccine specifically administered.
Oh, yes, you're right. Thanks.
And so for also, in addition to lot number, they also want vial number, like the specific vial inside the lot, I believe.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge we run into. As I showed you in that HL7 implementation guide, boy, there's hundreds of data elements, and some of them have correlating elements in NEMSIS, and many don't. We also have, that the patient was shown a statement about the vaccine and things like that that are just not in here. So that is sort of part of the question, really, is this idea of, how far do we go and how much do we try to model at a national level?
Yeah, that is, I kind of lean towards trying to build it out. Just, I think a lot of vendors do have controlled substance modeling built out in their things, but just NEMSIS has never, built that out. And I think that's to our detriment right now.
Okay.
And maybe in the future.
In SafetyPad, we're collecting expiration, serial number, lot number, vial number, the whole shot.
Mm-hmm.
Great comments. Other comments regarding this work?
Okay, and then Nick from Image Trend said we've had requests to include a value for month in demographic elements to go along with the year. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, great. This is a work in progress, as we've talked about. So as we move into the new year, we'll also be talking more about this. And we're glad to have Eric on from the Office of EMS, so he's hearing this conversation, which is helpful. Right, Josh, you want to move on to Performance Measure API, provide a couple of comments regarding that?
Yes, just a quick update on that. Let me get my screen sharing on again. Okay, as you know, every couple months we've been adding a new measure to the Performance Measures web service and dashboard. And just last week we added one more, which is Trauma-03, the effectiveness of pain management for injured patients. There's a quick look of what the data is looking like. What this measure looks at overall is if the patient had an initial pain score of something greater than 0, did they have another pain scale by the end of the call that was lower than the initial pain scale? So did EMS do something that lowered the amount of pain that the patient was experiencing? That's been added to the dashboard and the web service. We have the documentation also updated, so you can get all the details about how this particular measure is calculated. With this measure, we have now implemented all of the NEMSQA performance measures that can be implemented using national elements only. And so we will wait till NEMSQA comes out with another round of measures that they publish before we can implement some more. So you can go ahead and check that out. Any questions on the performance measures? Okay, thanks.
All right, I think next up on our list is Monet.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Let me go ahead and get to that. Okay, we are currently attempting to gain some information about the transition plan for the version 3.5.0 standard. Can everyone see my screen? Julianne, can you see my page?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So practically each state page has this information about the timeline. Oftentimes we will receive calls from your local EMS stakeholders as well as your software vendors about your transition goals or plans. I'm using the Nebraska page because I am familiar that they will probably transition to 3.5. There's another state that is actually transitioning to 3.5 as well. We've created a survey to kind of gauge when states may transition, and so we wanted to get some information from both states and vendors about what questions we should ask. So here is the current survey. Basically, I'm asking if there's a time frame when states will go live, and I've decided to do it in quarters because I know some states don't have a specific date. So the first question is, do you have a time frame when your state will go live? Second question is, do you have a time frame when your EMS agencies will move to version 3.5.0? And then the last question has to do with if there is a new statute required for the implementation of 3.5.0. So I would like to find out if there are any additional questions that we should ask. And these questions will be asked to the state managers on a future DMC call or through the DMC listserv. Anyone? Okay.
Is that any sunset information on previous versions you want to ask about?
You know, David, actually, we don't have, let me just go back here. We don't have that information currently on each state page, but what we would do is refer folks back to the version 3 timeline about the closures. So for instance, if states are currently on 3.3.4, excuse me, we would like to remind folks that that version will be closing in August of 2021. Any other questions, David? Or anyone else on the call? Okay. If you have any questions, please send them to Clay, Julianne, myself, so that we can help get the survey prepared for the state managers. And I'll turn the time over to, I believe, Eric is next. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I have nothing specific for the group other than to say have a great holiday, enjoy yourself, spend time with your family, and just kind of reflect on all the accomplishments you've made throughout the year. There have been a lot of them, and there's going to be a lot of challenges in the upcoming year. So thank you all for your participation, and that's all I have for today.
Hey, this is Emma from Wisconsin. I actually have a question for Eric. In terms of the NHTSA COVID resource reporting tool, I was wondering if there has been any discussion around adding in a section about vaccinations. So from a state perspective, I think it would be helpful for us to understand from our services what percentage of their personnel who desire a vaccine and are eligible in a given phase have been able to obtain one. And while we could create our own reporting tool, we're really trying to funnel them towards the NHTSA reporting tool. And so if there's a possibility that you guys are considering adding on some form of tracking of that, I would love to, hold off or contribute ideas to how that could be captured. I'm not sure if other states would find that useful, but it seems like at a national level too, it might be helpful to track, what percentage of EMS providers are actually being prioritized in the appropriate phases.
Actually, it's an excellent idea. It has not been discussed in our office at this point. I have no problems with adding that. And Clay and Julianne, if you want to add that to the list, and I would put it up towards the top. I think the first step would be to find out if anyone has taken a shot at this already, has already established an approach at tracking it. And if they have, let's capitalize on some of that work. And if not, can we put together a small group and actually, it would be great since you want to participate. I'd more than welcome that. Put together a small group to come up with what should be included. In the meantime, I'll talk with Dr. Kramer this afternoon on my call with him and let him know that this is what we're thinking about or something we're considering doing, and see if he has any guidance from the ASPR HHS task force. So no, to answer your question short, we have not considered it. Yes, I think it's an excellent idea, and I'm more than happy to move forward with it.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'll send along just a follow-up email to you and Julianne and Clay and probably include my initial thoughts, but happy to be involved however I can be helpful.
And if anyone else on the call has ideas or thoughts or has examples of anything that they're working on or considering, please send it along. We'll put together a real brief summary, and right after the holiday, we'll get back on next week with kind of where we are as a starting point.
Thank you, Emma. Are there any other questions, comments? All right, the next V3 implementation call won't be till January 13th. We will maintain the schedule of V3 calls twice a month on the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month. Give us a holler if you have agenda items that you would like discussed on the V3 calls. We are open to all of those suggestions, and also any suggestions for trainings that you would like to see happen next year. That's very helpful to us to make sure we're targeting information that's useful to our stakeholders. Thank you so much for being with us today. We will get this posted on the website by end of day, probably by end of day today. And we hope you all have a terrific holiday season. Thank you for taking time to be with us this morning, and we will see you all next year.